We are nearing the end of yet another act as Act 2 is in its last 2 weeks. And it's definitely been a little quiet in the last few weeks. But at the same time, the meta still experiences a few shifts and changes as the community becomes more familiar with the new controller landscape. What is going on, ProGuides family? It's your host, Sergeant Frost, and today we have the patch 4.07 tier list. And before we head into the tier list, if you're trying to climb the ranks and set yourself up for maximum improvement as a player, make sure to visit us at ProGuides.com, where our Radiant and Immortal level coaches are always there to give you individualized guidance. Link is in the description if you're interested, and now let's jump right into it. Starting off the tier list strong, we have to hand it over to Jett. Through thick and thin, you can guarantee Jett will stay a constant in the Valorant meta. This act was promised to be focused on agent balance and game health, yet Jett has not been addressed at all, which should be a bit concerning. But on a more positive note, the main reason Jett is able to stay in this position of power is due to the fact that the other duelists are not strong enough to give players a reason to pick them over Jett. She has speed, agility, flight, a dash, and a powerful flashy ultimate. Other duelists are starting to see more play on certain maps in rank recently, but it's not enough to push Jett out of the #1 spot just yet. One agent that has been ever so slowly creeping his way up to the top of the S tier is Chamber, and for good reason. Right now, Chamber is the Mr. Do-It-All in the meta. His Sentinel class ranking can be a bit deceiving because he operates pretty much like a duelist in game, well outside of the fact that all of his abilities are Sentinel abilities. Chamber has some aggressive options going for him that other Sentinels don't, and that makes him appealing and attractive to players in rank that want to carry. That's one of the biggest reasons why second duelist players on pro teams are running him on most maps right now in the meta. Chamber has probably the best investment to return ratio as an agent right now, and he's definitely the agent you should attempt to learn and practice next. Closing out the S tier, we have Silva slipping a bit in the rankings. Silva is slightly falling a bit in the rank meta, and that's mainly due to KO, Sky, and even Breach becoming more prevalent in the meta. Don't worry, Silva is still the information king, but he's not as necessary as before from previous acts. As in many maps, teams are choosing to switch him out for other initiators on occasion. He still possesses amazing tools to use in game. He's just getting some big competition from his counterparts, especially since the game is starting to become a bit more brawly in the mid to late rounds, which is a style of gameplay in which different agents tend to shine. Now let's move into the A tier. After a few nerfs at the start of this act, Viper has stabilized in the meta. She still has her place on her best maps like Breeze, Icebox, and Fracture, but she's not a mainstay on the other maps like she used to be, like maps such as Bind and Split. Riot hit her Sentinel-like capabilities when they started tweaking her smoke abilities, because it took away some freedom with how she could use her poison to anchor as well as lurk consistently. In a Viper main's hands, you should be able to work around her smoke timing nerfs since she's still very strong even after those nerfs. But her timings feel very different and definitely require some extra time to get used to. Viper is still fine to use, and she's definitely sitting on top of the A tier for good reason despite her nerfs. I don't know about you guys, but I'm happy that Omen is back to his old self in the meta. Omen is without a doubt the most consistent and most straightforward smoke agent to use in the game at the moment. His buffs did him well because after Viper and Astra were nerfed, Omen reclaimed his throne as the best smokes in the game at the moment. He's proven that he can still handle the role of main smoker, and this is making his pick rate go back up to what it used to be before the days of Astra and Viper. His shadow step was actually changed to be something really strong in game, which could beat spawn timings and reposition very quickly. Overall, this is probably the strongest Omen has ever been in the meta, and it's a great sight to see. Welcome back, Omen. Please don't get nerfed and leave us again. We missed you. Unfortunately, after the initial stim beacon buff craze, Brimstone had to get a nerf to tone down on how overwhelming his executes became by losing one of his stim beacons. Brimstone is not as widely used as Omen is at the moment, although he's probably slightly better in the ranked environment due to the prevalence of 5-man rushes. We guess the devs underestimated how good those buffs to his stim beacons were, and it made Brim insanely strong both on attack and defense. Because the devs most likely didn't want to tone down or revert the buffs they gave to a stim beacon because Brim needs it, they took the easy way out in balancing him by just taking away one of his stim beacons and forcing him to only carry one now. This change is fair because his stim stays in its buff state. Your team just can't be obnoxiously fast in game now like how he used to be when he had 2 of those things. Finally, my favorite agent KO is getting the love and attention he deserves in the meta, and I'm here for it. KO is being utilized for what his kit was designed to do, and that is take out defensive setups on bomb sites. It's a lot harder for your enemies to fight properly and take ground when they can't use their abilities, and KO is becoming a force to be dealt with in game because of it. His abilities bring a unique twist to how certain executes are approached, and it also forces enemies to play in areas they might not want to simply because if KO finds out where they are, they'll be staring at 8 seconds without any abilities as your team takes over the whole site. KO can only go up from here in the meta, and expect to see even more of him in the future as more agents get added into the game. Reys is seeing some adequate play in the meta right now, although she's not particularly overwhelming. We mostly attribute this to the other duelists falling into mediocre territory, but Reys is still a duelist that can pack a punch with her kit. The main selling point of her kit is the scouting and info gathering of her boombot, her mobility with satchels, and most importantly the sheer damage output she can put out with her grenades and ultimate. No other duelist has the speed and agility to be the lead entry fragger on attack, while also having enough firepower and AoE damage to keep teams in check while on defense. Reys is an agent that every aspiring duelist main should have in their agent pool this episode. Coming back into the A tier this patch, we have Yoru. Yoru is definitely rising, as currently top Yoru mains are destroying in ranked, with the current rank 1 player being Cody, a Yoru main. Players like Cody and Exter have tons of clips on social media showing the outplay potential and trickery Yoru can get away with when you learn how to become an expert at manipulating his kit. Personally, I've been playing a lot of Yoru and he does feel really good to use right now in the current meta. There aren't a ton of duelists stomping on his territory of being a flash distraction agent since Reyna and Phoenix aren't in the best spot right now. And his mobility makes him sought after in solo queue to disrupt teams' defenses and make them scramble to keep track of where he is at all times. Yoru has the potential to make some big waves in the meta if any pro players master him. If there's one duelist we can recommend you consider learning for the future, Yoru could be the pick. Closing out the A tier this patch is the Australian bird wielder Skye. Skye's in an okay spot in the meta right now. KO has more niche uses in the meta because of his suppression, so he does take priority over her right now when teams are wanting a skirmish initiator for their team comp. And Silva has high priority over her on most maps because of his info gathering. Skye can still be used with great effect when you're an experienced player on her, but her kit doesn't have a main selling point anymore that makes her a must-have initiator on a team comp. Even Breach has a selling point of a lot of CC, which makes him useful on maps like Fracture and Haven. Skye doesn't need buffs because that would make her a repeat offender of the same problems she had in the past. But she doesn't need any more nerfs because that would be a bit unfair and would make her borderline useless. She could use some changes in future patches to make her more intuitive, but it isn't imperative that she gets changed at the moment. At the top of the B tier this patch, we have none other than Killjoy. Killjoy is seeing play in the meta, just not as much as she used to, and you can thank Chamber for that. Killjoy is suffering a bit because Chamber is such more commonly used now, making it so that she isn't high in pick priority. Not to mention, Breach did get buffed a while back to counter some of the abilities in her kit. Despite Chamber taking her spotlight, there are still positives to her kit for her team, such as her lockdown, her sight denial setups, and her flank watch capabilities on attack. Despite her woes in the meta, you have to keep in mind that she's still a great sentinel, and she's definitely more useful on a general level than Cypher and Sage are right now in the meta. One of the most interesting cases of an agent in Valorant right now is Neon. She was released with a lot of hype, and then the hype disappeared for her and now she's barely used. But unlike other agents that have faded into irrelevancy because they were straight up bad, Neon isn't viewed as bad by the community, and she feels more like an unutilized pick. Neon is strong but also underrepresented. She's hard to use and she's hard to work with in a ranked environment, but she is strong in coordinated play since she can cause a lot of chaos and beat spawn timings and expectations with her speed. Basically, Neon is falling into the Breach category, where her abilities need an entire team to be aware and on board with what Neon is doing, in order for her to be anywhat effective. Solo queue is quite uncoordinated, so like Breach, she is a good agent, but she requires too much teamwork in order to pack a punch with in game usually. But with teams like Optic and Liquid experimenting with her on a normal basis, we might come to see some interesting uses that Neon has for anyone to use. Breach. Ironically, Breach is not down bad in the meta right now. He's actually doing really well since he's starting to see more play on maps other than Fracture. He's finally starting to become more of an overall good pick rather than a conditionally strong agent like he used to be. Other initiators do offer more in terms of specific in-game niche. For instance, Skye has healing, Silva has info, and KO has suppression, which makes them have priority in picks over him in most team comps. But a good Breach player can wreak havoc on maps like Haven and Fracture right now with how strong he is for teams. In solo queue specifically, Sage can be a very useful and sometimes needed pick. In lower elos like Plat and below, her healing and revive can be the difference maker between your team winning and losing a game. And that's mainly because Sage specializes in correcting teams' mistakes, which is to say that if you're taking a bad fight or your teammates take heavy damage, a Sage can patch up and give your team an advantage. But outside of that, Sage is harder to find value out of now with how other Sentinels have taken the main stage and pushed her somewhat normal kit out of the way for more specialized defensive setups. Last but least in B tier is Cypher. Cypher is weaker now because of KO's prevalence in the meta. His setups are strong, but it's hard to use his abilities for more than other information gathering as KO is on the other team. The reason is because Cypher's setups are strong when played around, but not very useful if it's just used to stall like Killjoy's setup could. More importantly, he's also very hard to use well and mostly only worth using if you're a Cypher main. If you aren't a Cypher main, you will get much better at consistent use out of using any of the other Sentinels, especially when considering how intuitively easy Killjoy is to use and get decent value out of. Cypher is definitely a specialist pick, and you should only really use him if you're dedicated at making him work. It's pretty interesting to see Astra sitting all the way down in C tier nowadays. She was once the bane of all of our existences because of how hard she could mess up enemy teams' plans in game, and now she can barely use her CC abilities to influence the game without being at risk of being out of stars. Astra is weak as expected, but she's not completely useless. She's just stuck behind either being basically a smokes only character or being a full sentinel character. Teams that run her now often choose one side to focus on and run with it because she's no longer close to being able to do both as well as she used to be. But that's not to say that she's a definite no-go for any prospective users. She just has a lot more limitations than before that make her feel like a shell of what she used to be as an agent. Don't get me wrong, it hurts to see Reyna down here, but we're obligated to tell you guys the truth. Reyna offers nothing special at the moment that gives her precedence to be picked over any of the other duelists. Yeah, she can heal and flash, but other duelists can do that as well and still offer other utility to their team. Reyna is dependent on getting a kill to flip her switch and around. But a lot of teams are privy to Reyna's playstyle and they are keen on not feeding her kills to get her going, especially since players know how Reyna operates and know how to avoid her. Reyna doesn't offer much to a team outside of getting a first pick and then snowballing. Reyna is a nice pick in an experienced player's hands, but if you want a duelist that is consistently a high value pick that takes the space for their team, Reyna might not be the agent to fit the bill. Okay, I saw it a lot on social media this week, but we're starting to get behind the notion that Phoenix needs to be reworked. His kit is just not cutting it in the current meta. The only ability that has any substance in his kit is his ultimate, and that's not a good sign of his kit's health that the ultimate is the only truly useful and impactful ability in his kit. His flashes are outclassed by every other flash in the game, his wall is outclassed by Neon and Sage's wall, his molly is clunky and it's more used for healing most of the time anyways. His kit is quite literally an underwhelming worse version of other agents' abilities in the game. It's going to take a lot more than some number change buffs to fix Phoenix. He needs a full-on rework like Yoru got where he gets completely new abilities to refresh his status as a solid agent in Valorant. Well guys, that's all we have for this 4.07 tier list. If you enjoyed the video, please like, comment, and subscribe. This has been your host Sergeant Frost, and I'll see you all in the next one.